Hello, I'm Jacky Hart and I'm an ex-member of the Exclusive Brethren who now call themselves the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Over the past 5 years I've done a fair bit of work to try and raise awareness of this group and their practices. For those of you who may not have heard of the Exclusive Brethren, they are an offshoot of the Plymouth Brethren movement. This movement started around 1825. There were various splits over the years, and the Exclusive Brethren evolved as a result of these splits under the leadership of a man recognised as their founder, John Nelson Darby. John Nelson Darby introduced the idea of keeping separate from evil, and this doctrine was taken to a different level in about 1959-60 by the then leader James Taylor Jr. The result of JT Jr.'s interpretation of this doctrine was that Brethren members could not mix with, eat or drink with, or have ties with anyone outside of their community. This segregation is enforced from birth, and from the age of 7, children are taken out of mainstream school to attend Brethren-only schools known as focus schools. The consequences of this are that if someone decides to leave the Brethren or is asked to leave, they lose their relationship with their family. Because the Brethren only work for each other, they often lose their livelihood and their homes as well. The extreme hurt and harm that this causes has been happening for decades and largely goes unacknowledged by the authorities. So what triggered the desire to raise awareness of the consequences of the Brethren's principle of separation? Well, just a little bit of background to this. I was born into the Exclusive Brethren, being 4th generation on my father's side. When I was 18, I was put in a position where I had to choose between life in the Brethren or my family. I chose my family, but that necessitated leaving the only community I had ever known. It was quite a transition, but I was more fortunate than a lot of people who leave the Brethren, as I had most of my immediate family with me. My eldest brother left home straight away to stay with Brethren. I did not know what he was told by the Brethren about us, so I do not know at what point he realised we, his family, would not be returning to the Brethren. So I got on with my life, and although my Brethren past was not forgotten, it was largely mentally buried. And there's a picture of my family going back some years, quite dated now. I next saw my brother briefly in 2003, some 19 years after we had left the Brethren. Then at the end of 2012, my brother phoned me. I was surprised because he had never voluntarily phoned me. He told me the Brethren had an issue with the Charity Commission of England and Wales, and he wondered if I, as someone not opposed to the Brethren, could write a letter to the Charity Commission supporting the fact that the Brethren were indeed a charity, there for public benefit, and one that causes no harm. I declined to write the letter, but started to do some research around the issue, and this was the trigger to my working to raise public awareness of the group. I remember there'd been an issue with the Charity Commission back in the 1970s. One of the reasons behind this issue was in 1974 a father in the Brethren found himself the wrong side of the leaders and was put in a situation where he had to live separately from his family in his own home. For 3 to 4 months he had to live in a back room, not being able to eat with his family or speak to them in a normal family way. This got too much for him and he took an overdose. He survived that, but shortly after he murdered his wife and 3 children and took his own life. The event hit the national press at the time. These events prompted the Charity Commission to appoint a leading QC to investigate the doctrines of the Brethren. This QC, Hugh Elvitt Francis, concluded 2 years later in his report that the Charity Commission should not register any meeting house of the sect which adopted the doctrine of separation from evil as practiced by followers of JT Jr. He said, "The doctrine of separation is harmful and calculated to disrupt family ties and perfectly normal and proper business relationships. It has caused widespread distress and anguish amongst many deeply religious and decent people and is against the true interests of the community." The Brethren appealed that decision, and in 1981 they won due to lack of witness statements that could be presented in court. I then discovered that the Charity Commission had turned down the application for charitable status of one of the Brethren's Gospel Hall trusts, the Preston Down Trust, on the basis that it was not there for public benefit. This had implications for all of the Gospel Hall trusts of the Brethren in England and Wales. The Brethren's response to this was to lobby Parliament, claiming that they were there for public benefit. I was told by one peer that the level of lobbying was unprecedented. There was also a suggestion that the Charity Commission were targeting them as a small religious community and that this could be construed as discriminatory. At this point, the Brethren set up a separate charity called the Rapid Relief Team. Their mission, as stated on the Charity Commission website, is to serve people with care and compassion in times of need. Their vision is for the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church to express Christian principles of care and compassion by way of benevolent relief to people in need. And their values are community, compassion and support. What the RRT essentially do is provide food for emergency services when they have to deal with a disaster. I have absolutely no issue with what the RRT actually do. In fact, when I see pictures on the RRT social media of young people in the Brethren serving food to non-Brethren, I feel pleased, as it is a chance for those people to mix with the world and hopefully learn a bit about people outside of their community. Where I have a problem is when this good work seems hypocritical or is misrepresented. For example, on the 25th of December 2017, the Rapid Relief Team worked with Network Rail at Euston Station in London. They provided meals, comfort, sleeping bags and beanie hats for approximately 200 homeless people and the less fortunate in society. The Managing Director of Network Rail commented, "So proud of you to give up Christmas Day to provide for the homeless." What was not said was the Brethren do not celebrate Christmas Day and never have done, and therefore, although giving up their time, were not giving up anything special. The other injustice of this good work is that the Brethren doctrines over the years have made many people, including my own husband, homeless. Those people who have left the Brethren and found themselves homeless have had to rely on the goodwill and charity of others. Whilst I applaud the work the Rapid Relief Team are doing to help any homelessness, I am frustrated by the injustice of them helping a particular predicament that their doctrines have resulted in many of their ex-members finding themselves in. I believe that people who the RRT are helping should be made aware of the background of the Rapid Relief Team. I have a strong memory of being told when I was in the Brethren that we did not give to or help outside charities of any description. The teaching at the time was that any time or money went to help only Brethren and that we kept separate from any problems in the world. This is a change the Brethren have made in order to comply with their charitable status. At the time the Charity Commission refused charitable status to the Preston Down Trust, they also became aware of the harm to many people that resulted from the Brethren's doctrines. They collected witness statements from many ex-members, including myself, giving examples of how families had been damaged and the hurt that had been caused. The issue was set to go to the High Court for a decision in January 2014, but shortly before this, the hearing was cancelled due to the Preston Down Trust agreeing with the Charity Commission to adopt and incorporate a deed of variation in their trust deeds. This deed is known as the Faith in Practice document, and it explains how the Brethren see their faith working in practice. The Charity Commission was satisfied that if changes were made so this deed is adhered to, they would register the Preston Down Trust as a charity. They did so on the 17th of January 2014, and the deed of variation has subsequently been adopted by all Brethren Gospel Hall trusts. I don't propose to read out this Faith in Practice document in full, but I would like to highlight one paragraph, as it is particularly relevant to the awareness I work to raise. The Brethren agreed that where persons seek to leave the community, reasonable assistance should be afforded to them in terms of support and/or financial assistance relating to employment or other matters, where they have been dependent on the community for that support. Reasonable steps should also be taken in these cases to allow the continuation of family relationships where a family member has left the community. including providing access to family members, in particular children. This paragraph was the one that should address the changes necessary to stop the harm and hurt that is caused when a member leaves the Brethren. Indeed, in a recent report produced by the National Secular Society, in which they argued that the advancement of religion should not automatically be a criteria for charitable status, they said in their conclusion, if the law recognises that advancing religion is inherently charitable and therefore worthy of benefiting from public funds through tax exemptions, this not only leads to religious organisations gaining privileged status in society, it also gives the government power to insist that a religion change its fundamental principles and teachings, an example being the Preston Down Trust, who agreed to changes in religious practices in order to be considered charitable by the Charity Commission. In their annual report of 2016-17 on tackling abuse and mismanagement, the Charity Commission cited the Plymouth Brethren Gospel Hall Trust as an example of their active monitoring. They monitored 24 trusts to ensure they were complying with their governing documents, including the Deed of Variation. The Charity Commission ceased monitoring towards the end of 2016, presumably as they had no concerns. So the assumption seems to be that Preston Down Trust and all other Gospel Hall Trusts have made changes in their practice in order to justify their charitable status. I do think some changes have been made, for example the setting up of the Rapid Relief Team, but the fact remains that if a person finds themselves outside of the Brethren community for whatever reason, they lose their family, and that can cause significant emotional harm. Shortly after this document had been agreed, we had the opportunity to help a young girl who wanted to leave the Brethren. She had to leave secretly, with no help from the Brethren, and she herself had no idea of the changes the Brethren had agreed in order to stop the difficulties and emotional harm experienced by someone who wants to leave. This request coincided with a TV producer contacting another ex-member saying they would like to make a documentary about someone leaving the Brethren and the challenges they face adapting to life outside the Brethren. Both events were not initiated by me, but happened to come together with serendipitous timing. And so, the documentary Britain's Secret Sect was aired in August 2015. All the filming was done contemporaneously and nothing was staged. The Brethren were given ample opportunity to put their side in the documentary, and indeed the director wanted them to take part in order to give balance. They declined to be filmed contemporaneously, but did issue a statement at the end of the programme, in which they said, "Where a member leaves the PBCC, but their family members remain, church members respect the natural relationship between the parent and children. The PBCC is committed to allowing the continuation of family relationship in line with the principles set out with faith in practice, which has been accepted by the Charity Commission." So this statement went out on national television, and yet that is quite simply not happening. Last year, I and another ex-member had the opportunity to raise awareness on a programme that Alex was also involved in called Cults, Taboos and Twisted Faith. The interviews we did resulted in 5 minutes of viewing time in which an ex-member told some of her story about how she had lost her children, and I tried to give balance by explaining why the Brethren had taken her children off her. The Brethren were of course given the right to reply. We were expecting a written statement which would have been read out, just as happened in Britain's Secret Sect. However, the reply was a letter from the Brethren lawyers threatening legal action for libel if the TV aired the 5 minutes of our interviews. The producer passed the comment that in her 19 years of producing TV documentaries, she had never received this type of reaction or a letter like it. The documentary had two choices: air the interviews anyway and risk litigation, or get together the absolute evidence that what we said was true and send that back to the lawyers. The evidence would have been perfectly possible to get, but with 1 week to go until the programme was due to air, there was not enough time in view of the limited time frame, so the TV company took the decision to pull the 5 minutes of viewing rather than risk getting into litigation. This felt very much like the law had been used to silence a true and disturbing story. I have also had the opportunity to do an interview for the YouTube channel Talk Beliefs. Over the past 4 years I've done this, a presentation on the Brethren, and a couple of podcasts, all of which can be viewed on this channel. As a direct result of this public speaking, I have been contacted by several members, usually young people, of the Brethren who wish to leave. We try to help them and guide them as much as we can. We do not persuade them to leave. That has to be their decision, because the consequences of doing so are costly, and they need to feel in control of making their own decision, probably for the first time in their life. If speaking publicly like this makes life better for just one person, I believe it's worthwhile. Alongside taking any opportunity to speak publicly about the Brethren, I also work to raise awareness with various authority bodies that the expected changes do not seem to have happened among the Brethren, possibly due to lack of understanding of the deed of variation adopted by the Gospel Hall Trust and the reason behind why it's agreed. As religion generally seems to be seen as a force for good, I find sadly authority bodies are reluctant to accept any evidence I give. It seems the Brethren's word that their harmful practices have ceased is accepted, and any evidence to the contrary is not perceived to be a matter that requires investigation. The Brethren are a relatively small group, and I suspect authority bodies do not have the time or resources to investigate concerns. So why am I doing this? The Brethren I know would far prefer I did just what I'd done for over 25 years, got on with my life and left them alone. Well, I see the hurt that's caused by their extreme separation practices. I have tried to support mothers who have had their children coerced off them and consequently been heartbroken. I personally know of 4 cases recently where a parent felt suicidal because they've lost their children, simply because they, the parent, have left the Brethren. Thankfully, 3 of the 4 of them are in a stronger place now. The external persona the Brethren like to portray is of a strong Christian community that keeps family at the heart of their beliefs and lives lives by the teachings of the Bible. In fact, the caption on their Facebook page reads, "Family is at the heart of everything we believe and everything we do." And yet over the years their doctrine of separation has ripped so many families apart, and this largely goes unnoticed. The Brethren have been known to argue that it is sin that divides families and not their practices. If we had the tragic incident of a suicide bomber, it hits the headlines and everyone is appalled at how many families' lives will be affected by the sudden and tragic death of their loved one. But here, families suffer what I believe is called a living death. Their loved one is still alive, but they are not allowed to have a relationship with them. Which is more harmful, or are they equally harmful? I also know firsthand the extreme difficulty a person has in leaving the Brethren should they decide that the Brethren life is not for them. The guilt they feel at wanting to leave can create a mental anxiety that at times makes that person feel suicidal, as they see that as the only way out. Rather than being told the Brethren will support their decision to leave, they are made to feel they are wrong for wanting to leave. In fairness to the Brethren, their mindset is such that they honestly believe anyone who wants to leave will not be saved and will come under evil influences in the world, so they genuinely believe that making it difficult for someone to leave is the right thing to do. What do I hope to achieve by raising awareness of the Brethren? In a word, and as I've indicated, change is what I'd like to achieve. I do not want the Brethren system to collapse, because there are many lovely people in there who have given their whole life to living the Brethren principles. They are often not aware of the hurt and harm caused to ex-members by those principles, and it would completely bewilder them if the Brethren system was totally broken. I also believe most Brethren do not realise, as per the deed of variation, family relationships can continue if a member leaves. The Brethren will argue the paragraph in the deed of variation that says it's up to each individual member if they allow the relationship to continue, and it isn't a result of their practices. But after so many years of mental conditioning to have, in their words, moral, physical and legal separation, their members will do nothing else but say they do not want a relationship with a member that leaves the Brethren, and some refuse to have any contact at all. Most brethren do not realise in the deed of variation the brethren stated separation from evil involves drawing away from the world in a moral sense rather than the physical one, but they sure draw physically away from family members that leave the brethren. It hardly seems just to me that a document is agreed to avoid a court hearing, and yet that document is not being adhered to in the way most reasonable people would expect it to be. Over 40 years ago, the Brethren's charitable status was called into question by a leading QC. Practices haven't changed, and yet they still enjoy the privileges of charitable status. But I believe change is possible if there is enough awareness of the harm and emotional hurt that is still happening and how it is destroying people's lives. Media and public pressure will surely in time motivate government bodies to act. One of the bigger barriers to change that I believe is common to all totalitarian groups is a refusal to communicate. I have really tried to communicate with the brethren, including my own family that are still members. They will converse about neutral topics like who has married who or what children someone has had, but they do not seem prepared to discuss their doctrines. They have apologised for past mistakes and hurts caused, but I question how sincere the apologies are when it is not followed by any change in the core doctrines. In the absence of being able to discuss these issues with the brethren, raising public awareness has to happen. Change among the brethren may have to start from within, and this is only likely to happen if the brethren find out things. I know that the brethren try to restrict their members' internet usage and that this is an ongoing battle. If members can find a way around these internet restrictions, they can often educate themselves, and by doing this, change within the brethren could just be possible. But the fear to do so within the community is still immensely strong. There have been anecdotal reports amongst the ex-brethren community recently that the rules have changed regarding relationships with ex-members. As ex-members, we do need to act on these reports in order not to let the situation of no relationship become self-fulfilling. However, when I sent a friendly email to my family in the brethren recently giving updates on our family news, I received no acknowledgement or reply. That won't stop me trying to establish a relationship though. We are fortunate enough to live in a country where religious freedom is embraced, but when that right to religious freedom causes physical harm or severe emotional harm by dividing families who otherwise would have enjoy normal relationships, wouldn't anyone want to raise awareness and seek some redress? Thank you for listening, and are there any questions? Well, the brethren obviously use technology. They have computers. Their computers are issued by a brethren company, and their internet access is restricted. So, for example, being able to go on YouTube would not be possible. But what seems to be happening is that a lot of the younger members of the brethren are not finding it difficult to go off to a superstore and buy their own cheap phone that then gives them access to finding out information that they can't find out on their brethren-only computers or their brethren-only phones. And I know this is of concern to the leaders of the brethren. They think that anything that's not controlled by the brethren on the internet is wicked and worldly, but it is happening. And the other thing I found out from a recent leaver is that the younger members of the brethren almost quite enjoy trying to find ways around the whitelisted sites, like YouTube, so not harmful sites, to get on and watch films and watch pop songs and so on. So I think there was a time when they banned the internet totally, but realised that that was not practical in a business world. So they had to introduce it, but they're trying to control it. And I'd like to think not very successfully at times. And hopefully people will find out information. If they find out information, they will realise that it is within their power to change things. And that's what I hope in time. I don't think they understand quite why it was agreed and the intricacies of what is in it. I know it was a concern expressed to the Charity Commission that the trustees of the Gospel Hall Trust may not let their members know that there was this deed of variation that they have to abide by in order to keep their charitable status. And I know that to get round that, the brethren read out the document once to all the brethren in every meeting hall, the whole 55 pages, or it was a very long document. But it's difficult to understand the mindset of somebody whose mind is controlled by a totalitarian group, and this isn't unique to the brethren. You don't ask questions. So you'll read it out, but what you will absorb is the issues with the Charity Commission, the leaders have sorted it, and you won't ask questions. So most ordinary members of the brethren won't realise that if their son or daughter or their husband or wife or father or mother leave, that does not have to stop the family relationship. But because of their mindset, they will say, we will choose to stop the family relationship. So it's a very difficult thing to actually alter the mindset of a group of people that have been brought up with this total separation. I think one of the leaders before the current one called it absolute separation from the world. So I don't think any change will happen overnight. It's going to take a long time, but change is what's needed in order to stop this harm.